What's going on, boys? We are on day number 14 of reading through the book of Deuteronomy. We're officially at the 2-week mark of reading through this series. So I just want to say thank you to those who have been sticking along. I know this series has been kind of a crazy one as far as just some things we've been learning about Moses and the Israelites and just the crazy things they had to go through as they were trying to seek this land that was promised to them, and they are so ready. And so for today, we're actually going to be looking at a very kind of interesting passage. Two passages, actually. One that talks about clean and unclean food, and then we'll look at a small section about tithes. So clean and unclean food, what does that mean? Well, I actually did a little research on this because, clean and unclean food, in today's world, we would think of, food that is healthy, that is not, infested with, bugs or anything. But, back in the old days, in the Old Testament, there was actually I wouldn't say a system, but a command almost that was in place to kind of differentiate clean and unclean food. And what I came to the realization of was that clean and unclean food, the reason why it was labeled like it was, and it wasn't just about whether you have a certain seasoning on it, or if it was gluten-free, or if it was lactose intolerant. No, it was literal whole foods. So meat to dairy products. There were specific animals that were listed to say you can eat this because it's clean, but you can't eat this because it's unclean. And so I actually want to kind of bring together 3 different sets of verses that I think kind of all say the same thing, but kind of in a different way as far as what type of foods they are and why we should, go about consuming them or not consuming them. So the first section I want to read is verses 6 through 7, which says, "You may eat any animal that has a divided hoof and chews the cud. However, of those that chew cud or that have a divided hoof, you may not eat the camel, the rabbit, or the hyrax. Although they chew the cud, do not have a divided hoof. They are ceremonially unclean for you." And now I'll jump down to verses 9 through 10, which says, "Of all the creatures living in the water, you may eat any that has fins and scales, but anything that does not have fins and scales, you may not eat. For you it is unclean." And then lastly, verse 19, which says, "All flying insects are unclean to you, and do not eat them." And then also verse 20, which says, "But any winged creature that is clean, you may eat." So we go from basically looking at 3 different kind of environments that these animals reside. We look at animals that reside on the land, that reside in the water, and that reside in the air. And so there's a list, and there's actually a couple different animals that are listed on each. For the land, for example, it talks about things you can eat are goats, deers, gazelles, sheep, stuff like that. Which, most of these animals we're pretty familiar with today because we still, do consume those animals on a kind of daily basis, on the things that, we make in our everyday meals, to the dinners that we have, to the lunches, whatever it is. But it's interesting, the things that it lists as not eating are things that we really don't, still to this day, don't really consume. And I haven't really heard of anybody doing this. Camels, hyraxes, which I didn't look up what a hyrax is, so feel free to fact check me on that. And then a rabbit. I've heard of people doing that, but I myself did not think that would be something for me. Fins and scales in the water, that's pretty basic to fish. Fish, shrimp, crab, all sorts of stuff like that. And then the last one that caught my eye was something that, really kind of made me laugh a little bit, is that flying insects are unclean to you. So you think about flies, mosquitoes, dragonflies, all the things that fly in the air, the bees, and to be honest with you, every time they're around me, I am never thinking, man, I wonder if it could eat that. I wonder if that would be a really great source of protein. And to be honest with you, I don't think it would. I really don't think it would. So I would not recommend that any of you would do that. But, you people have minds of their own. So, but I think what's interesting is that, the reason why these animals are listed isn't a way of, saying, here's the menu of life. Here's what you can consume as your protein sources to get your calories in. But no, this is a way of representing and giving praise to God. God is saying, hey, in order for you to give praise to me fully, here's what I am giving you that you can consume. Here's what you must not consume. Here's what you do. Here's what you must consume. One of the little phrases that I wrote down in my notes says, is to remain clean, you must eat clean. So, and this applies more to just than physical foods. This is more of like, life options. If you want to have a clean mindset and you want to have a clean way of looking in life, you must be willing to consume. So this means the things that you watch, the people you hang out with, the decisions you make, whatever that is, you have to be willing to make them that, they're going to be better than you were before, because the things that happen around you can have an effect on your mind, and that can kind of trigger some things that you decide to do. And so that's where you have to say, okay, here's what I'm going to change, and this is what's going to change in my life. Here's what I'm going to start doing. I'm going to start with A. I'm going to go A, B, C, D, and see if it works. Again, these creatures that are listed, while, most of them that are listed are the ones that we still pretty consume on a natural basis today, I believe that when we consume food, it is a way of, celebrating a gift from God. And we get to consume and be happy, because every time we eat food, we're happy, we're filled, at the end, we're all stuffed, we're like, man, I'm full, I just feel so great. And I believe that this is a privilege from God, that we get to have the opportunity to consume and eat these creatures that nourish us and allow us to go out and be even better and stronger versions of ourselves. And so this leads me to the second passage for today's word, and it's called tithes. Now, tithes are something that I am not 100%, I won't say familiar with, but it's not something that I'm 100% knowledgeable on. It's something that I'm still trying to get into the hang of getting into. But, tithes, I'm sure if you've gone to a church, or maybe your home church has, talked about this, that, they'll talk about, we give back to the Lord because he's given all to us. Basically what we're doing, we're saying, Lord, you're doing so much for us, I want to give back what you've given to me. So however much your income is annually, or your income is, for whatever, you're saying, look, I have so much that I'm going to set aside this amount and give it back to you. And so the question is like, well, what exactly happens with that money? Because we know that, while God doesn't necessarily need that money, it's like, okay, if I make, let's just make a prime example here. Let's say you make, $100,000 a year. And so you set aside 10%, that's $10,000. Where does that money go? Where does that money go? And there's actually a part that I want to talk about that I really think explains where that money goes. Verse 22 says, be sure to set aside 1/10 of all that your fields produce each year. So again, 10% of what you make each year, that's what we give back to God. And so now I want to look at this little passage at the end of this series that kind of talks about where this money goes that we give from our produce. And it's verses 28 through 29, which says, at the end of every 3 years, bring all the tithes of that year's produce and store it in your towns, so that the Levites who have no allotment or inheritance of their own, and their foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live in the towns may come and eat and be satisfied, and so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. So I believe that the money we give back to God, it doesn't just go away. I believe that God utilizes that to provide for others that are not so as wealthy as you are. Because the reason why you are in a wealthy position is not by chance. It is by privilege, and it is by, grace that you have the opportunity. And I believe that the way God is saying, hey, remember that I'm the one that got you here. And I think that our response to be, thank you, Lord, I want to give this back to you. I almost think of it as, the stories you hear online about homeless people, who finally get out of homelessness, and they get their life together, and they go out and they go back to someone who is homeless, and they give money to them to say, hey, I was in that position one day. I believe that single one of us has been in a position before where we haven't really had much, maybe not necessarily been homeless, but we've been in a position so low that we don't have a way of saying, look, I don't have anything. And there's been someone, whether it's been a family member or a friend or someone walking along the street, has given you something, whether it's been $1 or $10, $100, or even just something that, can change your heart. It doesn't even have to be money. And I believe that's what God calls us to do. He says, look, these people are in need. They need your help. I want you to go share my word with them. And not only does this transform their hearts, but the word of God, renews our minds as a whole. Money can't do that. There's a famous saying, money can't buy happiness. It really can't. It may satisfy your needs for a time, but that's temporary. Everything on this earth that you think makes you feel better is a temporary satisfaction that goes away after a period of time, and there's no getting that back. So I think what we need to be doing is understanding that, while, even if, you're not in a great position in life, we should understand that giving our time to help others in need is the best thing that we can do, because not only do we get to know that person better and get to know their story, we get to, just talk about life. And I believe that God just kind of brings those two together, and we can just talk about things. And, for the Israelites, I mean, they're going through so much, and they don't, they're constantly being tempted, and they're trying to figure out how they can obey God fully. And God's just throwing all these things at them, and I can imagine they're just overwhelmed. But I think what we have to remember is that, they've come so far, and if God's brought them this far, who's to say that he's just going to leave them? Because he won't. And so that was where we'll end off today. I want to go ahead and read today's daily prayer in the book, the 365 Power Prayers for Men. Highly recommend it. We're on August 15th, and today's title is called Prepare the Way. Pretty ironic that we just talked about preparing the way, about tithes. The verse connected to it is Isaiah chapter 35, verse 4, which says, "Say to those with fearful hearts, be strong, and do not fear, for your God is coming to save you." I am excited to think about you returning, Jesus. It will also be a day of great trembling and fear. I want my heart to be ready and my body to be strong in the face of tribulation. Strengthen me to stand in this current culture and learn what it means to endure. Give me a heart that is not taken with the things of this world, but passionate about you. Like John the Baptist, help me to prepare the way for your return by straightening the paths and bringing truth to all men. You are coming soon, and I want to be ready. So we have the opportunity to share with others about Jesus. We know that he's going to return one day. We don't know when that day is going to be, but we know that it is coming soon. And what I can tell you is that Jesus has done a lot for me in my life. And while I may not be John the Baptist or a priest or a pastor, I can promise you that, I do believe that Jesus can do great things in so many people, and that he can change anybody's life by one simple action. And that is today's word. I hope that you guys have had a great Friday, and I hope to see you guys tomorrow. Peace out, boys.